Yes, sir, you can
Yeah.
start now.
A very good evening. My name is Dr. Kamal. I head the Medical Affairs Department at Ajanta. On behalf of Ajanta Pharma, we welcome all of the experts and the delegates for today's discussion on hypertension management, new directions in 2022. It's our pleasure and privilege to do this discussion under the aegis of API. I welcome all of the experts. Today's moderator is Dr. A. Muruganathan. Speaker is Dr. Tiny Nair. And we have expert panelists with Dr. K.K. Parikh, Dr. Mangesh Tiwaskar, and Dr. Samitra Ghosh. Once again, a very warm welcome to all of the experts and all of the delegates. On behalf of Ajanta, we would like to salute all of the doctors who have been true warriors in the current pandemic battle. A very big thank you to all of the doctors, sir. And as a our bit towards the fight towards COVID, Governor of Maharashtra has appreciated Ajanta Pharma, and Ajanta Pharma has been committed with the health worldwide. We have introduced more than 150 products which are first to market in last 10 years. We are spread across 4 continents with our presence in more than 30 countries, and we are a strong team of 6,500 Ajantites all across globe. We have 8 state-of-art manufacturing facilities in India and Mauritius, with 2 US FDA approved units in India as well. With our strong thrust on R&D, we have more than 750 scientists working in state-of-art facilities, and we have strong presence in cardiology and diabetology. We have our presence in ophthalmology, dermatology, and pain management. With this, I would take this opportunity to briefly introduce Dr. A. Muruganathan. Dr. Muruganathan is chairman at AG Hospital, Tirupur. He is past president of API and HIS. Dr. Muruganathan was awarded with the prestigious BC Roy Award from President of India on 1st July 2005. He got Lifetime Achievement Award from KG Foundation in Coimbatore in July 2008. Dr. Muruganathan got IMA Best State President Award in 2002-2003, and he received Appreciation Award for organizing CIMA CGP 2007. He received IMA CGP Silver Jubilee Oration Award in his oration on ethics yesterday, today, and tomorrow at the 83rd All India Medical Conference held at Indore. He got IMA Award for Membership Growth and Development for 5 years, and he is recipient of Distinguished Service Award from Rotary International 2008. With this, I would invite Dr. Muruganathan to kindly moderate the session, and kindly invite Dr. Tiny Nair for taking his session. Dr. Muruganathan, sir, over to you, please.
Thank you, Kamal, for that introduction. Though the topic is the directions in 2022, my biodata, what you mentioned was 2008. So you have not updated my biodata. My biodata was very old biodata.
Right, sir. My apologies, sir. Actually, there were too many things here, sir.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes,
I am the same person. I am not changing. So like COVID, I only be like this. I won't mutate. I'll be like this only. Now I'm very happy to introduce the today's speaker, Tiny Nair. A very, very good, powerful speaker. And he's a very good poet. You know, whenever he gives any point, he will give good analogy. If you say nighttime hypertension, nocturnal hypertension, he will show all the nightclubs and say nightclubs are very good, nightclubs are active, and he'll give a poet also. He has written so many poems. He has written a book also. He's a voracious reader. So in that way, the new directions in 2022, because nowadays we talk all about 2022. Even the COVID management, Mangesh was talking 2022. So like that, hypertension management, also the basic management doesn't change, but we have come to so many understandings about the hypertension. So every day we are learning. After all, medicine is a science of uncertainty and art of probability. So this uncertainty is there always. So that is why we are learning every day. Association of Physicians of India is one which updates the knowledge and disseminate the knowledge to many people. That is why our dynamic secretary and the past president Parikh is also with us. And coming to Tiny Nair, whenever he delivers a talk, the listeners will understand easily and will give a lot of good points, which you can follow, practical points. He doesn't describe in the usual style. His own style he describes, and the directions in 2022 is a very, very interesting topic. In fact, I have delivered this talk last week, but I'm really eager to listen to Tiny because I may gather few points from him, because he always works, and his angle, his thinking is different. So I'm very happy to welcome Tiny Nair, who is the renowned cardiologist. Especially his passion is for hypertension. He's from Kerala, Trivandrum, and he's an interventional cardiologist also. And he has done a lot of work. His papers are published all over the world in various aspects. And his special interest in hypertension and the mask hypertension. And then he is also an author in the very big study, Indian heart study on the hypertension, where he did, I think, more than 25,000 ambulatory blood pressure monitoring and 20 home blood pressure monitoring. So he's an authority to talk to us on this new directions. Now coming to the other panelist, my elder brother, Dr. Parikh, even today, he sees more than 100 patients a day. His experience and practical points. So we learn everything through so many journals, so many points, but his experience is with the patients. So his point of view about the new directions in 2022, I think Parikh will be very happy to share during the panel discussion. Mangesh, no chance. He always updates knowledge in every aspect, including diabetes, including hypertension. So he's a jack of all trades, and he's a very good speaker. And definitely, he also will throw more light on 2022. And nowadays, we always learn every day some new things. And thanks to WhatsApp, some of the WhatsApp programs are very good. So though sometimes regarding COVID, the WhatsApp programs are not good. But regarding hypertension, every day we bring new points about hypertension. So I now request Dr. Tiny Nair, who is the speaker today, to present his presentation. The flow will be like this. After Tiny Nair, there'll be interactions, and I request all the participants and the delegates to post questions in the chat box, and it will be our pleasure to get the questions answered by the experts like Tiny Nair and Mangesh and Dr. Parikh. I think the other person from Calcutta has not joined. If he joins also, Sumatra Kumar, I think he is not joined. Once he joins, we'll also involve him. I once again wish you all a very happy and a healthy. And now over to Dr. Tiny Nair. Tiny Nair, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such a nice introduction. In fact, it's always so nice to get introduced by you. You talk so much of good things about all of us. And yeah, is my screen visible and am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
yes, sir. Absolutely.
So the topic today is hypertension management. What is new in 2022? I always believe that when we have a meeting, learning process, it should be something that we can take home, learn and apply it tomorrow in our practice. So all these topics that we are going to touch today, they are about 10 of topics. We will make it in such a way that every topic, you can apply that knowledge on the diagnosis and management of your hypertension patient tomorrow. So this is new directions, but then they should be easily applicable in the clinical scenario right tomorrow. Nothing new topic, nothing where you need to wait for a drug to come. Let's start with the concept of biomarker. We all know what a biomarker is. A biomarker is a biological chemical that tells us about a disease process happening in the body. We have biomarkers for cancers, we have biomarker for ST elevation MI, troponins, or acute coronary syndromes. We have NT-proBNP, which tells us about the cardiac function. But is there a biomarker for hypertension? Till now, we thought it is not there, but that suddenly changed with the publication of the ERIC study. The ERIC study stands for atherosclerosis in communities. This study is a large trial, involved about 10,000 patients of hypertension. and followed up for a period of about 16 and a half years. Okay, this was driven by Dr. Hussain, who is from Baylor College of Medicine, Houston, Texas. This trial involved measuring NT-proBNP. We all know that NT-proBNP is a marker for heart failure. But this is where NT-proBNP was tried in looking at hypertension. Unusual, right? So 9,000 patients followed up for 16 and a half years. Now we know that NT-proBNP is normally a marker of heart failure. Normal is less than 300 picograms per ml. So anybody who has less than 300, we say he has no heart failure. Anybody who has more than 450 picograms per ml, we say there is heart failure. So this is a very good biomarker for looking at heart failure in the ER. The patient comes with breathlessness. If you're unable to do an echo, we say that look for BNP, right? Now, when a BNP is less than 300, it is normal. But in that normal range, does the BNP tell us anything about long-term outcome of hypertension? So they divided the patients of hypertension into 3 groups, where those with an NT-proBNP of less than 100, 100 to 200, and 100 to 300, and more than 300. So they kept it in the normal range itself, right? Now look at what they found. We will all keep our presentation short so we can just take home what is the motto of the whole learning, right? So in this graph, you can see in the y-axis is the number needed to treat. We know that smaller numbers needed to treat means that the therapy is effective in preventing a cardiovascular event. This is an NNT 10, means NNT for 10 years. The blue bars are low-risk hypertensives, red bars are high-risk hypertensive with a risk of more than 10%. On the x-axis, you have this systolic blood pressure. So look at the picture. Interesting. You have 120 to 140, 140 to 160, and more than 160. Now, if you see, the first thing that strikes you is this, that in that, they have divided each of these groups into the 3 groups that we said, depending on their BNP. So less than 100, 100 to 300, more than 300. We said only more than 450 or 500 is heart failure. So these are all patients who have no heart failure. The ejection fractions were normal. Okay, so they have no heart failure. Now, the first thing that strikes us that as the BNP increase, the number needed to treat comes down. Means that you treat them and you can quickly prevent an event, which means we are actually getting higher and higher risk people. If you look at N-terminal proBNP, whether it is mild hypertension, moderate hypertension, or even severe hypertension. So higher the BNP in the normal range, between 100 and 500 or 450, we still get a marker for how the risk is. Right, interesting. But what is even more interesting is that if you take the person, for example, in the mild hypertension group, 120 to 140, who has a BNP of more than 300, let us say 350, but not in the abnormal range, he has an NNT of 21, right? Which is exactly similar as a person who has low risk, but severe hypertension of more than 160, which means if you find a mild hypertensive patient with a low risk, he has a BNP of, let's say, 320, we would say that your risk is exactly like that of a person with severe hypertension. So I need to treat you more vigorously. So NT-proBNP today, between that range of 100, 200 to 300 or more than 300, tends to give us an idea of those patients who are not in heart failure as to how they would behave in the next 10 years' time. So in that normal range, BNP of less than 100, 100 to 300 or more than 300 gives us an idea of the long-term risk profile of a hypertensive patient. And that's why today we say that probably by 2020, you are going to see NT-proBNP as a biomarker for hypertension. You might say hypertension biomarker. It's expensive. Today, NT-proBNP costs about 1,200 rupees. But understand that this is only once in the lifetime of a hypertensive that you are doing an NT-proBNP to long-term decide whether he needs intensive therapy or not. So our patient of mild hypertension, he has high BNP, we would intensively treat him. Now you'd say, okay, my patient cannot afford a costly biomarker like NT-proBNP. Do I have something economical in 2022 to look into? And it is here. If we look into the background, this old data, you can see this 92 data from the Framingham, which showed us that if we look into ECG criteria of left ventricular hypertrophy, we see that coronary heart disease increased by 3 times, stroke by 6 times, cardiac failure by 15 times. Right? If we have a patient ECG showing left ventricular hypertrophy. So ECG showing left ventricular hypertrophy shows that our patient carries a very high risk. So we say it is like the troponin of a hypertensive. Okay. But the problem is, okay, with all this high risk, the sensitivity of an ECG to pick up LVH is low. It is only about 10 to 15%. So even if your patient has an LVH by echo, it may not be picked up by the ECG. So the sensitivity is low. Okay. So in 2022, the new thing is, can we increase the sensitivity? So we know that we look at an ECG. Every day we see such ECGs. What is it? Left ventricular hypertrophy. How do we diagnose? 1, the V1S wave plus the V5R wave more than 35 millimeters. That is what we call as Sokolow-Lyon criteria, telling us that yes, this is left ventricular hypertrophy. Second, if there is an ST depression and T inversion in the lateral leads, we call it LV strain. Third, if you have a lead 1R wave plus a lead 3S wave more than 25 millimeters, we call it a limb lead criteria, whereby we say there may be LVH. And finally, we have the Connell criteria, that is AVLR plus a V3S more than 20 millimeters in weight. That is Connell criteria. So Connell criteria, AVLR with V3S more than 20, Sokolow-Lyon V1S, V5R more than 35, LV strain, and limb lead criteria of lead 1R and a lead 3S more than 25 millimeters. Okay, now what is new is this in 2022. This data came in 2021, where we found that if you combine this ECG criteria of left ventricular hypertrophy, that improves detection of risk in hypertension. And that, despite it looking so simple, is a very large step forward. Why? Because this is called the Perugia score concept. The Perugia score concept tells us that if we combine all this, as we go on combining a Connell criteria with the Sokolow-Lyon criteria and add up the LVH strain with the limb lead criteria, the Perugia concept tells that you have a very strong risk predictor by looking at the ECG itself, right? No NT-proBNP, no costly test, but a simple ECG. And the sensitivity, if you combine all of them, goes up to 67%. So in simple 12-lead ECG, where a lead 1R and a lead 3S more than 25, a V1S with a V5R more than 35, a AVLR and a V3S more than 20, which is the Connell criteria, and a left ventricular hypertrophy with a strain pattern, the ST depression and T inversion, gives us a good sensitivity and a very good long-term direction about what is going to happen in my hypertensive patient and how vigorously I need to treat him. Okay. The next point is about out of office blood pressure. We know that blood pressure recorded in our clinic or hospital is not very reliable. The patient will be upset, he will have anxiety, white coat hypertension. So we talk about out of office BP, and any meeting we go, the first question is asked, is it ambulatory BP better or is it home BP better? And we always used to dodge the question because we didn't have an answer. But in 2022, we tend to have an answer. In 2021, we will just keep this study short. A data by Schwartz group on the reliability of office, home, and ambulatory BP very clearly showed this data. So on the left panel, you see the office BP. On the central panel, you have the home BP. And on the right, you see the ambulatory 24-hour BP. And very clearly, it is the home BP that wins over, not just by reliability, but by prediction of correlation with LV mass index, which is one of the finest predictors of long-term outcome of hypertension. In fact, you would see that when we are talking about an ECG LVH, what are we talking about? We are talking about the LV mass index. So today, if somebody asks that within these three, if you are given a choice, which one are you going to choose as one investigation? We should say this home BP because its reliability and correlation with LV mass index is the best. And that, I think, is a very important learning in 2021, which we are going to carry forward to 2022. One question that for the last 2 decades that was bothering us was how do we intelligently choose between ACE and an ARB? See, the RAS inhibition is becoming huge. We have migrated from ACE to ARB and then to ARNI, right? So between ACE and ARB, which one do we choose? And that answer tends to be clear today with the publication in 2021 of a huge database involving about 2.3 million people. Now, this data comes from multiple groups in all over the world, from CCAE to Optum to Panther. Now, all the service providers put their data in, and that data came in the Journal of Hypertension a couple of months back. And what do we find here? Whether we look at acute MI, see the straight line, anything on the left favors ACE inhibitor, anything on the right, ARB. So that you are looking at acute MI, that is heart failure, that is stroke and cardiovascular events. You can see that it's fairly on the straight line. So it looks like there is nothing much to choose between ACE and an ARB compared to its efficacy. And knowing well that ACE ARBs are tolerated far more better than an ACE inhibitor. Probably we can say efficacy-wise, both turn out to be similar. So this data tends to put an end to that so-called conflict between an ACE and an ARB in the treatment of hypertension. We are not talking about heart failure here. We're not talking about any other vascular protection here. We are purely talking about treatment of hypertension, and a comparison between ACE inhibitor and ARB. It looks like both are of similar efficacy, but ARB is far more tolerable. And when we're talking about a disease like hypertension, where there is no symptoms, I think this data in 2021 is very important to us, and we can carry it forward when we treat our hypertensive patient in 2022. Next 3 small topics would basically look at our concept of repurposing drugs that we already had with us and how we take it forward in 2022. Okay, right now they might look not cost effective, but I tell you cost is going to come down. Any drug, whether you take thrombolytic therapy or intervention, every drug, once it has become more in use, the cost has come down. So let us start with ARNI. Right, we know that ARNI is a good drug for heart failure. And in the last couple of years, we have learned a lot about ARNI. It also reduces HbA1c because it is glucose friendly. ARNI is renoprotective. But then what about its antihypertensive effect? Does ARNI, it is far more costly than ACE and ARB, have a benefit as an antihypertensive drug? Because we are already seeing that the cost of ARNI is coming down, and with multiple players, especially generic market coming in the next year or so, you're going to see a tremendous fall in the price of ARNI. But is ARNI a good antihypertensive agent? Now, the first data of ARNI came in this data on hypertension came in 2021, where we talked about neprilysin inhibitors in hypertension. We are not talking about ARNI in heart failure here. We're just talking about hypertension. Now, a lot of us don't understand why should ARNI be better in hypertension compared to an ACE or an ARB? It is just an ARB, right? But understand that when we talk about the natriuretic peptides, the natriuretic peptides are body's own vasodilators, right? They are natriuretic peptides. They cause diuresis and vasodilatation, but they, in our body, is naturally destroyed by a chemical called neprilysin, right? And that neprilysin is inhibited by one of the components of ARNI, that is sacubitril. So sacubitril inhibits neprilysin, so we don't have destruction of natriuretic peptides. We have a huge amount of circulating natriuretic peptide, and that is caught up by the receptor NPRA, NPRB, and NPRC. And these natriuretic peptides have a lot of effect. And one of those is reduction of aldosterone, diuresis, and natriuresis, as the name suggests, natriuretic peptide. Okay. Second thing, they tend to inhibit sympathetic tone and produce vasodilatation. We're not talking about valsartan here. We're just talking about the sacubitril part of ARNI. They decrease myohypertrophy and reduce cardiac fibrosis. They also tend to improve insulin sensitivity, increase lipolysis, and euglycemia. Right. So natriuretic peptide increase by sacubitril looks like has a lot of beneficial effect for us, which actually puts it into a point that neprilysin has various effects all over the body. Okay, neprilysin causes BP elevation by angiotensin, okay, cardioprotection, it glycemic controls, angioedema, Alzheimer's by amyloid beta. So when we inhibit neprilysin by sacubitril, we get not just control of hypertension, but benefit in multiple organ systems. Okay, so the question is, does that actually translate into a benefit? Now, the first data of ARNI reducing systolic blood pressure came quite early. This is about 5 years back, when we saw that compared to the red, which is valsartan, in the center you have the placebo, again on the right you have Paramount trial valsartan, the blue is ARNI. The systolic blood pressure reduction, as you can see there, is what? About 15 to 20 millimeters. Okay, and the diastolic blood pressure was reduced by about 5 millimeters by placebo or valsartan, and 12.5 millimeters, from 10 to 12 millimeters by ARNI. So significant systolic and diastolic blood pressure reduction over and above valsartan, right, which is an ARB. So addition of sacubitril has not only inhibited neprilysin, giving us a lot of peripheral benefits, but has given us a handle in additional BP reduction. This was not understood by us in the initial phase when we were looking into the heart failure trial data. In fact, there are about 13 of them ongoing trials of ARNI in hypertension going on. And few of them are likely to finish in 2022. And my take would be, we are going to see a huge amount of data coming out by the end of 2022. And ARNI, my prediction would be, is going to turn out to be a good anti-hypertensive drug. Right. Now, sacubitril valsartan as a treatment of resistant hypertension was the one to come first. See, any new drug that comes in, people first try it in patients who are extremely sick, like resistant hypertension, where nothing is really acting. So this data shows that if you take patients who are resistant hypertensive, defined by an apparent resistance to an MRA, meaning mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, which means given 3 drugs, a CCB, RAS inhibitor, and a diuretic, added spironolactone, still BP is high. And when they added valsartan versus ARNI, you see ARNI was far more effective in reducing blood pressure by another 10 millimeters. So yes, in resistant hypertension, resistant to 3 drugs plus an MRA, ARNI had done well. Okay, so the world's first published expert consensus on ARNI came in the American College of Cardiology Journal in May, last May, 2021 May. And people look forward to this drug going to be a standard drug to be added on in cases of a resistant hypertension. But that is resistant hypertension. What about the ordinary hypertensive who would come and sit in front of us tomorrow opposite our table? Will he benefit by ARNI? No, cost apart, cost is going to come down. But that data has come from the neprilysin inhibitor evidence from Asia data. Is there data from Asia? Does it work good in our population? And the answer is yes. See, what we have found out is in Asians, one, we tend to have a stiffer arterial system. And that stiffness increases as we age. So a stiffer arterial system as we age is the reason why we get a higher central systolic BP. So we as Asians tend to have a higher central systolic blood pressure. Okay, because our arterial system are stiffer. And the second thing is we take a higher salt diet compared to the Europeans and the Americans. And we tend to have, the last data, if you remember rightly, about 55% of Indians, this Chennai data, are salt sensitive hypertensives. So we have salt sensitivity, and that reflects why we have significant nocturnal hypertension. This is something on which we have done quite some work, and as Dr. Muruganathan said, Indians, we have significant nocturnal hypertension. We have non-dippers or night risers, and that the reason has been linked to salt sensitivity. So our spectrum is on one side, we have a stiff arterial system, and the other side, we have increased salt sensitivity, salt sensitive hypertension, which reflects as a hemodynamics of a nocturnal hypertension. And incidentally, sacubitril valsartan tends to take care of both. On one side, the increased stiffness, and the other side, the salt sensitivity. In fact, this is the only combination drug that tends to do this. Now, is there data? Right now, we are awaiting. And you can see the number of Asians included in the trials of hypertension in ARNI. About 8 trials are purely on Asians, and the number of Asians are huge. So by the end of 2022, we are going to get the data. And I strongly believe that the initial indicators are that ARNI is going to be the antihypertensive of tomorrow. Think it as not as a different drug, but think it as something that is graduated. ACE inhibitors. Now we got ARB, which is a RAS inhibitor without much of side effect. And today we have one generation of ARNI. In fact, in the algorithm of heart failure management, we are not talking about ARB at all. We are saying that straight away you can go in from ACE inhibitor, straight go for ARNI. You need not go in between a step for ARB. Now, in what clear ways to the clinician, you and me, ARNI scores over, let's say, an ARB? Because ARNI is nothing but a sacubitril plus valsartan. One, peripheral BP, the BP that we check. ARNI is definitely at least 5 to 10 millimeters more potent than an ARB comparator. Second, in the 24-hour ambulatory BP, it's very clearly superior to ARB, especially in lowering the nocturnal BP. And Dr. Muruganathan knows how many meetings we have described how nocturnal BP is so very important in determining long-term outcomes. So ARNI is better in controlling nocturnal BP. What about central BP? Clearly, ARNI is superior over ARB. 2, target organ damage. 1, the left ventricular hypertrophy, and second, arterial stiffness has been shown to be of good benefit by a ARNI compared to an ARB, where they say side by side, if you just take the stiffness, it is equivalent to ARB. But if you take LVH, it is superior to ARB. Now, coupled with its benefit on salt sensitivity, might be the reason why, despite similar effect on arterial stiffness, you get more reduction of left ventricular hypertrophy. Now, from ARNI, we come to the second repurposed weapon, number 2. and probably you would have already thought about it. We are talking about SGLT inhibitors. Right. SGLT inhibitors are anti-diabetic. They came as anti-diabetic. They take out more of salt and sugar in urine. They're good anti-diabetic drugs. And then we knew that they're good for heart failure. And then we knew that they are good for heart failure even when there is no diabetes. Right. Heart failure without diabetes. Finally, we knew that even when there is heart failure, with or without diabetes, even with a preserved ejection fraction, they are good. So they are good for entire gamut of heart failure. They're good in reducing the events, cardiovascular events, MACE in diabetes. They're good anti-diabetic agents, right? What about these agents being used as an anti-hypertensive effect? Because what if these people know that, okay, they slightly lower BP, but that is not used as a pure anti-hypertensive effect, right? Wrong. The new data indicates that probably in 2022, we are looking at something else. This first indicator that there is something else in SGLT inhibitors came in the post-hoc trial of EMPA-REG, where empagliflozin, they took out patients of resistant hypertension from the EMPA-REG outcome data and tried to see that how much effective was empagliflozin in that trial on patients who had resistant hypertension. They didn't come into the trial for the resistant hypertension, but they got involved in the trial. In fact, there were about 1,503 patients of resistant hypertension by definition. And if you look at their pooled data, look at that, compared to the placebo, meaning the other treatment, empagliflozin clearly had turned out to have a lower blood pressure during the follow-up of 206 study weeks compared to the placebo. So yes, empagliflozin did lower the blood pressure, but what was interesting is this, that when you look at the data, the gray bar here is placebo and the red is empagliflozin, right? And on the x-axis, you see the study time, 12, 28, 52 weeks, up to 206 weeks. Now, if you see over time, the gap between the brown bar and the red bar is increasing, which means over time, the effect of empagliflozin in achieving blood pressure control gradually increase. And that looks something very interesting, that over time we see that this drug, because basically this is a diuretic, right? That's what we thought initially. It should have lost its effect, but it seems like it keeps its effect and continues to do that. Now they went back and took out these patients of resistant hypertension and look at what happened to them in the long run. Are the different between the whole study group patients, general hypertensive patients, or those patients in EMPA-REG with just resistant hypertension? And they found that whether you look at cardiovascular death, heart failure hospitalization, cardiovascular death, or heart failure hospitalization, MACE, all-cause death, and progression of nephropathy, very clearly the benefit was homogeneous. So patients of resistant hypertension got a benefit in reduction of blood pressure with SGLT inhibitors, but at the same time, they benefited in endpoint reduction, which I think is an extremely interesting and good data. But this editorial talks about are SGLT inhibitors new hypertensive drugs? And I think there is something very interesting for us in India, and that is this. In this data, if you look at the red bars, they're empagliflozin, 10 and 25 milligrams. The blue is placebo. You see that the white on the population on the left, the black population on the center. What you find is the Asian population is the one that had the maximum blood pressure reduction from baseline. So somehow it seems like we are blood pressure wise the most sensitive group to SGLT inhibitors. The reason we are not aware, but SGLT inhibitors, blood pressure lowering effect seems to be most in the brown population compared to whites and the blacks. And that is why I feel that over time, we're going to see SGLT inhibitors emerge in combination as one of the drugs that will be used in the treatment of hypertension. Look at the data, right? Significant change of 10 millimeters from the baseline compared to about 6 millimeters on the blacks and about 4 millimeters in the whites. This is the reason why the antihypertensive effect was never very prominently shown in the trials which came out of the Western population. Now we end up with the repurposed weapon 3 before we open up the talk for the discussion. And that is something very interesting. And there are a couple of things for us to learn. This is a combination of a Findranone, which is an MRA, with empagliflozin. Now you might say Findranone is not available in India, likely to come in 2022, but forget about that. Even if you replace that Findranone with spironolactone or eplerenone, the concept remains same. So we are talking about an empagliflozin or SGLT inhibitor combined with an MRA. Now understand that this is not this 2021 data, very new, but this is a model of a rodent where they have tried this data. Why I picked it up? Because this is very important, especially in the Indian background. Look at the data. In the rodent model, you see that combination therapy of empagliflozin and Findranone had this rodent model surviving maximally survival compared to Findranone alone or empagliflozin alone, or even of course placebo. So one, it prolongs survival in the rat model, right? But what is interesting is that if you look at the protein creatinine ratio, which talks not just about nephroprotection, but we know it is about long-term endothelial dysfunction. We see that this combination therapy of an empagliflozin SGLT inhibitor with an MRA, aldosterone antagonist, gives us one of the best results in reduction of urinary protein creatinine ratio. So probably, if your patient continues to have proteinuria, hypertensive patient, we're not talking about diabetic, while on a good dose of ACE inhibitor, we always used to say that you have an option of adding an MRA, provided the blood pressure is already well controlled. So your blood pressure is controlled, hypertensive on ACE inhibitor and ARB still has proteinuria. Today, we see that there's a new era concept of adding up an SGLT inhibitor along with an MRA for benefit. But wait, the data also showed that in the animal model, the cardiac vasculopathy, the vascular fibrosis, the kidney vasculopathy, and glomerulopathy significantly came down. But wait, this doesn't make any impression on us. The moment you see the pictures, they are truly fascinating. No other drug has done this. Look at that cardiac fibrosis. On the top, you see control. In the center, you see placebo, untreated. And down, you see empagliflozin plus an MRA. So empagliflozin plus an MRA tends to preserve the cardiac status by preventing cardiac fibrosis. And all hypertensive specialists know that it's not just myohypertrophy when you see an LVH, but gradually onset myocardial fibrosis is what we try to prevent. Because once there's myocardial fibrosis, we are truly in for trouble. Same thing happens in renal damage. You can see the renal damage is prevented by this combination. So the moment you see those slides, you know something new has come out. And probably we are going to see the future where we would see a combination of an SGLT inhibitor with an aldosterone antagonist. And finally, this is where we end. This is something very interesting. We all know about heart rate, right? We know that even in hypertensive, heart rate is so very important. In fact, Dr. Muruganathan was talking about this trial, the India Heart Trial, where the patients measured their self-blood pressure, huge trial. We learned a lot of things, 18,918 patients. You know, it was a very beautifully done trial. But we learned that the Indian hypertensive has a fast heart rate, and that is 83 beats per minute. This is what differentiates you and me from the Westerner. They don't have baseline heart rate or RHR, resting heart rate. This is happening. So we need to address the issue, right? So remember that we have fast heart rate. Point number 2 is that, so for example, you know, we have these new beta blockers, right? Nebivolol is one. The advantage of nebivolol is highly selective, metabolic friendly, vasodilator. We know that nebivolol releases nitric oxides, vasodilator, beta blocker, and it has a beta 3 agonism, right? But the cons are that we know that this beta-3 agonism, nitric oxide are more of theoretical advantage, right? They're on paper, doesn't appeal to the clinician. No large data of benefit and no Asian data. But we always say that a beta blocker like bisoprolol or nebivolol should be good because they should be acting in Indians because we have a rapid heart rate. Now wait. Now the point is, we in India, we are going through a huge transition, right? Look at that. We're an agriculture-based country, right? Now, the work we do is totally changed. The way we commute to work has changed, right? All of us have mechanized transport. The way our entertainment takes place has changed. The way our children eat food, they drink sugary drinks have changed. So our lifestyle has changed in India. There's a massive transition from where we used to do hard work and the kind of food and our entertainment, our lifestyle is totally changed, right? But then this is here. If you look at the global obesity data based on BMI 2016, right? We see that India, less than 5%. So we don't have that much obesity compared to US or Europe. Why? We said we don't know. But today we have the answer. There is a clear paradox. Body mass index does not clearly show obesity or an overweight in India, or it doesn't really tell us about the risk. For example, the Lancet article on body mass index and mortality in India, you see that data. On the x-axis, you have body mass index. On the left graph, you have Chennai. On the right graph, you have Europe and North America. On the right side, Europe and North America, you have a very linear relation with body mass index and the risk ratio of mortality, right? But in Chennai, it is flat. So if you take body mass index, it does not show our metabolic status. It does not even tell us about our risk profile. Why? And today it is accepted by the world. And that's why, that is a letter by the American College of Cardiology that yes, there's an Indian paradox of obesity. Could you be a member of the team which is trying to look into why there is India paradox? So this is a problem which the whole world today realizes. It's a problem. That is because this is how a Western obese looks like. And this is how we look like. We look thin, active, fit, but we are what we call as TOFI, or thin outside, fat inside. We have a lot of visceral fat and much less of subcutaneous fat. So if we look into our interior, we have a lot of visceral fat and less of subcutaneous fat. So we look good, but we have a lot of visceral fat. Now, why are we talking about that? Because if you look at the beta-3 agonism, which we talked about, for example, in nebivolol, it looks like very keenly connected to lipolysis. So here you see a connection between a sympathetic system and lipolysis. And that is today emerging as a very important advancement in science. If you think the beta-3 adrenergic receptor there, and lipolysis are very closely linked. Initially, we thought that connection exists only in brown fat. Today, we say it's no. It is there in every visceral fat. But is there a data? And that brings us to the very new data that came in. For example, nebivolol through the beta-3 adrenergic pathway has an effect on lipolysis. Okay, in human adipocytes. So in this trial, what they did during a general surgery, they took out samples from normal healthy people, visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. Okay, piece of it. And then they cultured it in vitro and then exposed it to a dose of nebivolol, which is equivalent to that we take as a therapeutic agent. And what did they find? Look at that pictures. Control and nebivolol, you see the fat droplets clearly in human adipocytes reduce, and the graph looks like that. And this is subcutaneous fat. What about visceral fat? Same picture. So both visceral fat and subcutaneous fat are clearly depleted when you use one of those new beta blockers, which are beta-3 agonists. And once this kind of data is coming with a good effect on control of heart rate, I think what you're going to see in 2022 is a re-emergence and a resurgence of beta blocker in the prescription of hypertension, because that would control our heart rate, our adrenergic system, and probably in the long run, put us in a better metabolic state compared to other group of drugs. So you say that data, there's large amount of data coming out today, 12,000 patient data of nebivolol, whereby about 10% where diabetic. Will not go into the data because of paucity of time. We can always take it up in the question, but this is interesting. There is today data from Asia, the Benefit Korea trial of 3,000 patients, where they've shown the efficacy and benefit of nebivolol. Not just singly, but what is interesting is we tweaks out the data. Okay, this registry data showed that in Korea, nebivolol was effective de novo, monotherapy with RAS, with CCB, diuretic, everything. But what stands out is that nebivolol with a combination of CCB, so calcium antagonist, but with nebivolol, reduces systolic blood pressure by about 16 millimeters on the mean, and a diastolic blood pressure in the lower graph by about 10 millimeters. So one of the most significant blood pressure reduction was obtained by a combination of CCB and nebivolol. This is the Asian data. And I think this is beginning of a total change of the concept that we carry. So for me, what in conclusion are the new directions in 2022? We are not talking about utopic drugs that may or may not come to India. We are talking about everything that are available to us in hand. Point number one, I see that NT-proBNP is going to come out as a major biomarker in hypertension for those who can afford. For those who cannot, we have still the left ventricular hypertrophy in ECG. Unfortunately, most physicians don't even care looking at the left ventricular hypertrophy. So let us remind ourselves, we'll not forget the lead 1R plus lead 3S of 25, the Lindblad criteria, the AVLR and the V3S as a Cornell criteria, and the Sokolow-Lyon criteria of V1S plus V5R of 35, along with an LVH string. That covers the entire pedagogia concept, whereby we get a sensitivity of more than 60%. And that tells us that our patient with LVH has a significantly bad outcome. He needs to be treated vigorously. Point number 3, home blood pressure. Today the answer is clear. What is better? Office BP, home BP, ambulatory BP. Overall, every test has its own benefits. Home BP is the most reliable and predicts probably the best outcome. ARNI, which today is expensive and looked upon a drug for heart failure, is likely to turn out to be a good drug not only for resistant hypertension, but for the Asians, where it looks like it has a significant benefit in BP lowering. Being HbA1c friendly, ARNI is likely to be good for us. The combination of SGLT inhibitors along with an MRA, so for example, empagliflozin or dapagliflozin with an spironolactone or eplerenone, which are available straight away, might be a drug of choice for specific situations which we have already described, apart from being used in resistant hypertension. They are likely to be a group of drugs which prevents target organ damage like cardiac fibrosis and renal damage. Finally, newer beta-3 agonists, beta blockers, and quite a few of the new beta blockers are in the wings to come out, are likely to again show resurgence worldwide, and especially Asia, where we see that these metabolic friendly beta blockers might be very good for a population like ours, where we have a rapid heart rate, where we have visceral adiposity, and we have altered metabolism unlike seen anywhere in the world. So at the end, ladies and gentlemen, we know that we are going through quite a bad time, and all of us just pray and hope that, a time would come when there would be just a switch. And the moment you press that switch, you would be welcome to a healthy 2022. Thank you for your time and attention, and I give back the podium to Dr. Muruganathan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thaini Nair. As usual, I will not say as usual, in 2022, you are far better than 2021. Your delivery, your points, and really good. Though I'm tempted to say it may be a old wine in a new bottle, but still the drugs which we are using earlier, how we can use it in a different way, you have said. And nowadays SGLT is now the molecule of the year, because now they say even the SGLT with spironolactone, one need not worry about the potassium. Whenever you use spironolactone, you have to worry potassium. But if you use with SGLT, you need not worry about potassium also. That is one point, everybody was saying. I have got a lot of things to ask you, Tiny, but because the points which you have touched is very, very good. But, I am very happy. I'm a proponent of home blood pressure monitoring. So you gave a one important evidence and trial, which I always tell, everybody that home BP is my passion, and that is what you should do. So you must promote home blood pressure monitoring in 2022. And having said that, I tempted to ask you a question. Now there are a lot of home BP monitors have come, Tiny, which we were discussing, that nighttime BP, home BP monitor, which can replace ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. Can you throw more light on that first question about home BP monitor, which we can use nighttime, which can record 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And that is in the market now. And that is also validated by European Society. Your views, Tiny.
I think, the advantage of home BP is that it is inexpensive, it is easy to measure, and that gives you clearly a data. Unlike the ambulatory BP, which we say is a nocturnal awake BP, because the ambulatory BP, as you are sleeping and it inflates, you jump up and you wake up. Most people are sensitive to it. So the advantage of ambulatory BP is we can see clearly the nocturnal dip and the early morning rise, while the home BP we used to check before going to bed and early morning when we get up. But these new instruments, you can program them at a specific time. Either you can put it at a particular time gap or at a specific time, either early morning just before you wake up or at a particular time, so that you can catch the dip or whatever, which are very good actually. So we are creating a bridge between the home BP and the ambulatory BP, and tweezing out the important points that we were looking at the ambulatory BP, like the nocturnal dip or the early morning rise, and probably the average pressure during daytime and nighttime. So these new instruments are likely to give us almost everything that we used to get out of an ambulatory. Yes.
Yeah, so that is one thing in 2022. We are looking forward to the newer devices of home BP. Before I go to the panelists, one more important subject or topic, which I thought you will deliver it better, the combination therapy, and also the time in target, because nowadays we don't talk about BP variability, we talk about time in target, which will cover the nocturnal hypertension also. So your views on combination therapy and time in target. And we were saying so far the best combination is calcium channel blocker and ARB, but the way you described, especially for Indians, the best combination will be in the future the CCB plus with newer beta blockers like Nebivolol, because the Western countries, they don't use beta blocker like us. Even ACC does not say the first line drugs as a beta blocker. So we only say beta blocker is useful. So your views on combination therapy and time in target.
Yeah, I think today we all agree that we have migrated to an era of combination, whereby we start almost every patient with a combination, excepting those who are extremely frail, who are very elderly, or those who have got borderline hypertension. Everybody else goes on a combination. And that combination rests between our choice of a RAS inhibitor with a CCB or a RAS inhibitor with an diuretic. And we always tend to say that, like you said, ARB with the CCB perhaps looks best because it has the least side effect and has the longest duration of action. This is important because, like you said, the time in target is important. Whether we are talking about diabetes, where the HbA1c or blood pressure, whether we are looking at PT-INR, we know that more and more we can keep the physiology within target, the benefit would be more. So if my blood pressure is controlled on 3 hours a day and rest 21 hours it is uncontrolled, obviously there's no point in, my target organs are still getting damaged. So time in target is perhaps the most important thing, but very difficult to monitor. Like, how do we monitor? And there are a lot of ways. We are not going to that. But one of the best ways as of now is a combination of calcium antagonist and ARB. But then there is a change now, again favoring beta blockers coming out. If you look into the Canadian guideline, they've very clearly said that for patients who are younger, you can always use a beta blocker. People who need a beta blocker because of any reason, for example, whether there is an atrial fibrillation, angina, post-myocardial infarction, any LV dysfunction, any heart failure, they have migraine, whether they have got a portal hypertension, whether they have got sinus tachycardia, they have got anxiety, even always had a beta blocker. So people are becoming freer with the beta blocker. And I strongly believe, like you said, that probably beta blockers need to be considered earlier in our algorithm. Now, if you get a person who's got a heart rate of only 70, he is not anxious, he is a very quiet person, probably there is no hurry in giving him a beta blocker. He can still go in for an ARB and a calcium antagonist. But if you see one of those, IT fellows coming in, he is very anxious, talks fast. He says, doctor, I have to go. Doctor, I have got duty tomorrow. He works at night time. You can feel that he's driven by the sympathetic, right? And in that patient, if we give a beta blocker, not just to do good for him, he'll come back and tell you, doctor, I'm so happy. Now I'm so fine. His wife will come and say, doctor, he has become so nice now. He's not jittery anymore, right? So beta blockers are effective in people who are driven extremely by sympathetic. So I think we need to keep beta blocker in the loop and apply it depending on the patient that we see.
I think your point of, the wife will come and say happy, because nebivolol will not impair the erectile dysfunction also. So that is also one point, and
yes, in fact, there's one data set that clearly says that nebivolol improves sexual function.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I said.
It improves the penile blood flow in the cavernosum, and that's how it benefits actually.
That's why I said the wife will come and thank you because of nebivolol. And vasospastic angina for smokers also, nebivolol will be a very good drug. Now I will go to the panelists and come back to you, Tiny. Please stay tuned. Dr. K.K. Parikh, the elder person, tell me your views on the hypertension management in 2022. Is there anything which you are going to change, or what is your view on management of hypertension in 2022?
Let me first congratulate Dr. T.V. Nair for an excellent presentation and adding something very new which we were not knowing. We were not using ARNI as a antihypertensive drug. We were not using nebivolol as such a wonderful beta blocker. So I think the most important and the first thing, you are also you give advice for home BP, but I think it is very, very important to tell our patients, to educate them how to take the right blood pressure measurement, because this is more important. And if you take a right measurement of blood pressure, then you can rightly diagnose blood pressure. So it is very important, and we have to educate the patient about home BP, that how should he take the blood pressure. That is the most important thing, I think, the first thing before we go to such a big things. And number two, our patients of blood pressure are increasing every day in spite of lot of development in the technology, lot of development in the treatment, but still the number of patients are increasing. So I think we should, I'm not talking about at present, I mean, these are very good drugs, but I think we should talk about the basic, I'm not against all these, I mean, they are very good for resistant hypertension from where we do not know what is the drug to be treated. But the first line, which cost only a rupee of amlodipine or telmisartan, or which are even available in the dispensaries in the hospitals, I think we must first treat their blood pressure to a normal range. All these things come later on. But the first thing is to treat a patient's blood pressure who cannot afford treatment or who stops treatment, because adherence is the most important thing. First, measurement of the blood pressure is very important. Second, adherence of the blood pressure is more important. That patient should take blood pressure, because most of the time only 10 or 20% takes treatment advice to them. They stop in between after 1 year, after 2 years, because my blood pressure is normal. Now I don't need medicines, they will harm me, and there are so many things. So I think these are very good drugs. We know that SGLT2 is a molecule of this 1 decade. It's a wonderful molecule, and it has really brought a lot of changes in our management for diabetes, for hypertension, for so many things, heart failure. But I must appreciate Dr. T.V. Nair that he has given evidence for the use of ARNI as a molecule for resistant hypertension, when we don't get other molecule to add after all these drugs. So I think it is very important that we must also try this ARNI for patients of resistant hypertension.
Thank you, Dr. Parikh.
Can I add something, sir?
Yeah, please, Taini, go ahead. Please.
See, in the same thing, I think I 100% agree with Dr. Parikh what he said, because see, for the general population who are listening to it, the practitioners, see, the point is, if we take a hypertensive, let us say 40-year-old or a 50-year-old hypertensive, if he doesn't have any other risk factor, suppose he has no diabetes, no dyslipidemia, he doesn't smoke, he has no family history of coronary artery disease. Okay. Suppose he has no comorbidities, he has no liver disease, no lung disease, nothing. And suppose he has no target organ damage. He has
Right.
no left ventricular hypertrophy, no coronary artery disease, never had a stroke. Okay, he is fine. So no target organ damage, no comorbidity, and no other risk factor. That hypertensive, whether I treat with ACE inhibitor, Dr. Muruganathan treats with the ARB, somebody, Dr. Parikh treats with CCB or a diuretic, the outcome is near identical, right? Only thing is his BP needs to be controlled. So
Correct.
there, giving him a medicine that costs 200 rupees, he will get out of your clinic and say, I'm not eating it, right? Why give nebivolol or some bisoprolol or some latest cilnidipine? You give him the cheapest possible drug. It will still be controlled. See, if you can afford, he says, okay, I'm an executive, give him whatever. But that hypertensive, which are a majority, we need to treat it to goal by whatever. Like Dr. Parikh said, if he's 5 milligram amlodipine controls his BP, make sure that he takes it. That's enough. The
Right.
choice becomes important only when there are associated things. He had an MI in the past, he has an AF, he has coronary artery disease, he has
Target
diabetes, he has
organ damage.
CKD. Yes, that's it. That's it. Very true. Very right, sir.
I think
And I'll just sorry to interrupt you. And one thing which should all our physicians should know, that when a patient of hypertension comes to you, you take blood pressure, you prescribe medicine, but you also see evaluate the patient for the target organ damage. And I must appreciate again Dr. Taini Nair for telling the basic thing, which costs nothing. Almost it costs 20 or 40 rupees or 100 rupees in big cities. ECG. ECG, just by ECG, you can know everything about that, whether the patient has got target organ damage or not. So I think when a patient, because most of our physicians, many times they just forget that we must get his lipid profile or ECG or at least minimum urine creatinine ratio or creatinine. So I think it is also very important at the first consultation to ask patient for evaluation, because we may not ask everything in the first consultation, but we may ask him for further, when he comes for further consultation, we can ask him 2 or 3 tests and then we can see it.
Thank you, Dr. Parikh. I think Dr. Parikh is so well experienced person. His words of wisdom are very good, and that's why I asked him. As he said, whatever drugs you use, one of the Lancet article and New England Journal article said, whatever medicines you use, you bring the blood pressure to the target. So that way, what Parikh is saying is good. But normally, whenever a blood pressure comes, whether it's a simple hypertension or the hypertension with risk factors, the hypertension with complications, hypertension with comorbidities, depending on these 3 factors, or the hypertension is a secondary hypertension. So these are the things which you look for in a hypertension. Whenever there is a comorbidity or risk factor or complication, we have to choose the drug according to the persons and the age. And I'm very happy that accurate blood pressure measurement is the key. But still, I think less than 1% only measures accurately. So that is poor state of affairs. And in our clinics, we should have a video in the OP department to show the patients, the paramedical, how to measure a blood pressure. That video, I think we can circulate and make sure everybody has. And thank you very much, Dr. Parikh, for your words of wisdom. You are full of gray matter. That is why your gray hair is so nice and shiny. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. I can make them black also.
Okay. And now I
Dr.
come to
Taini, one thing more I would like to add.
KK Parikh, I will come to you because Mangesh is waiting.
Yes,
Otherwise,
yes.
Mangesh will upscan. So before he upscans, I will ask him and catch him now, because he's got another webinar. He's doing both together, I know. So Mangesh, now you are a person who is very much interested in SGLT, because you are talking at least 20-30 times about SGLT. So please tell more about SGLT and any point of contradiction of Taini Nair. I would be happy if you contradict Tiny Nair. Please go ahead, Magesh.
No, not at all. In fact, let me compliment Dr. Time and let me be a little more selfish to
Okay.
request you to share your presentation to me, because the way you have put in the perspective of the new vision. See, it's like fine, all these factors are established. Honestly speaking, we all are aware about what are our fallacies. No matter whether you come out and say and speak in public or not, but at least if you keep your hand on your heart, we all are aware about it, that what are our limitations of the practice. So we all are aware about it, surely, for sure. And most of the guidelines, they really talk about what Parikh sir has talked, or even Dr. Tiny has talked. Is this that yes, when a garden variety, a young hypertensive without any other challenges come to you, probably, the whole armamentarium is open. The choice doesn't matter at all. But most important thing out of what I take about from Dr. Tainna's lecture is one of the most beautiful things he has brought up is the role of beta blockers. Now, poor molecules, unfortunately, being so effective, so wonderful molecules, got a beating just because our Western Caucasian people, they thought that that was not a drug for them. And as the trend followed, probably our Asian colleagues, we being Indians, we keep on following our tail followings. And now probably, people like Dr. Muruganathan or Dr. Tiny Nair, who have started raising the voice that it's okay, fine. These guidelines are true for the Caucasian people, but we are Indians, we are different for sure. And we have our own ways of managing our hypertensive patients, and we do have our data. And now here, Dr. Tiny Nair shows me that yes, and he brought a beautiful point, a point of adiposopathy, which nobody talks. If you really look at the sick fat disease, it's whether it is a visceral fat or the subcutaneous fat. Remember that it's not just the fat, it's the sick fat. It's not, and a lot of times people tend to confuse, between this, and that is why this YY paradox and the role of beta blockers and as a whole as a nebivolol was just a representation of a cardioselective beta blocker. In fact, I'm more than sure about it that most of the beta blockers, which helped Indian population to manage blood pressure so effectively, and as far as SGLTs in diabetes and hypertension, absolutely there is no second opinion on that. There is no difference of opinion on that. And I must really put on the record, sir, my appreciation, one of the most mesmerizing and most, I would say, jaw-dropping presentation that I have, attended since the start of this year. This is the honest confession that I wanted to give you. You have changed the way the whole hypertension yeah, I understand. There are so many aspects that we need to, and to your point of trial, that very few measure blood pressure accurately. To be very honest to you, there is one more caveat to this. Is this that the blood pressure measurement correctness also is completely individual. No matter, you have witnessed sprint trial measuring the blood pressure in a very silent, quiet room, unattended blood pressure monitor. But believe me, you or me sitting in a quiet, silent room, forget about, and we not being a medicos, you are in the doctor's office, sitting at one isolated room, nobody seeing you are looking at you. You can imagine your anxiety at a different level altogether. How do you expect that blood pressure monitoring method is correct? Some people, they say that you should not be talking to the patients. Some people say that, you should be measuring the blood pressure in the lying down position, in the sitting position, and not in the lying down position. But quite a few of the patients will come to you, and I have seen those patients where they say that, doctor, I want to lie down on the bed. You measure my blood pressure while I am lying down. That is what they complain. And I don't feel comfortable when I'm sitting. While I am measuring the blood pressure, the most of the guidelines will tell me that you should not be speaking. The atmosphere should be quiet. You should not be talking to the patient. Lot of times I find that, if I divert the attention of the patient by cracking some joke, making the atmosphere light, I'm discussing about his kids or families or grandchildren, the measurement becomes more accurate. So, I understand the ways of blood pressure monitoring vary, and as you need to be smart enough to understand your patient need, individualize the blood pressure measurement techniques as well. And surely, as even Stephen Hales, who was an inventor of who was the first time guy who actually measured the blood pressure, wrote in his essay that you will never be able to measure the same blood pressure in the entire life of the person. It's just like a flowing water of the river. The same figure you will not never get. So what are we measuring is generally an overall, at the time of the blood pressure when you are when your patient is either sitting with you or the patient is out of the office. So I think your clinical correlation, your approach, your bonding with the patient, understanding the individual needs of the measurement, and an adequate instance, I would say stress on the therapeutic lifestyle change and salt restriction are the deciding factors actually to the success of blood pressure management, along with the correct pharmacological therapy. This is what I have to say.
Very good, Mangesh. I agree, because you are a real good practitioner. Especially, for people who are listening, when the ladies go to Mangesh Srivastava and when he measures the blood pressure, naturally the blood pressure will go up, and you'll make them calm and talk very nicely and get the blood pressure down. And coming to Mangesh's point, Nair, Tiny Nair, do you agree lying blood pressure still is useful? Because when we were students, we were measuring every blood pressure only in the lying position. Only now recently we are saying in the sitting, and then many of us in the clinic, they have a round stool. There is no back support stool. They always have this stool only. So your views on taking the blood pressure in the lying posture, and what will be the optimal pressure, or what is the normal blood pressure in the lying position?
I think what Dr. Srivastava said is very right, because each individual has its own zone of comfort. There are a lot of people who see the ACC gives those standard ones where your foot should rest on a floor, you should be sitting straight on the chair with your back supported, on the table, your arm is resting and there's no one is talking to you. But then all of us as practitioners know exactly like you said, that there are people who come to the clinic thinking that they have, especially cardiology, thinking some big heart disease is there. My assistant would have gone and checked his blood pressure and said, sir, it is 150 by 100. Okay, right. We went there, go and pat him and say, hey, your ECG is no, sir, doctor, somebody told me my ECG has got some heart attack. Hey, there's nothing. This is normal T inversions and all that. So where are you from? What do you do and all that? Oh, I know your family and all that. After some time you measure, it will be 120 by 80, right? So no talking and all those are all Western stuff which are made up. You put in a room alone and all that. That is likely to push up blood pressure. To be very true and honest, in my OPD, there is no place for the patient to sit down. They come and they lie down in a bed. There are 4 beds. My junior doctors come and examine. I come and see the patient. When I come, they sit up on the bed. And then when I examine, they lie down on the bed, right? So all blood pressures are recorded lying down initially. If there is a variation in lying down BP, only we check the sitting BP. I agree fully that is not AHA-ACC compliant. But what are we trying to measure? Yes. All that we are trying to measure, if the patient doesn't.
But Tiny, in the practical point, when you lie down, what will be the blood pressure? Is it less than the sitting pressure or more than the sitting pressure?
It will be less than the sitting pressure.
It will less than. Sir, the postural blood pressure measurement will have its only value when you are talking about, the autonomic dysfunction, or probably, you are trying to measure the blood pressure variability. So,
I think for both of you, home blood pressure monitoring, solves a lot of problems. Only when you train the person to take the blood pressure, and when they go home in their own atmosphere, when they measure, maybe first week they may not measure properly, but after a few weeks of measurement, they know how to measure, and they know when it will increase also. So they will learn. After all, see, the mobile phones, when it was used, nobody know how to use it. Now, people are using it left and right. So that home blood pressure monitoring, if you promote, I think that is the best thing. So my point of home blood pressure monitoring, again, is very useful.
I fully support what Dr. Srivastava said, because see, the Americans talk about so many things, right? And they put us guidelines because they control the academics, everything. Right. Now, if you see last month's KDIGO guidelines, part of it has come into the JACC. If you look at the data, 37% of people of diabetes in US got at least 1 microalbumin done in their urine, while the number of patients of hypertension who got an albumin checked in the urine was 4%, 404 in US.
Yes.
And what are we talking about? They will be doing an MRI scanning and not an urine albumin, right? Yes. And they are trying to teach us as to how to manage hypertension. See, okay, on paper, everything looks good. we all saw that data when they said that, okay, hospital, the system covers everything and everything and everything. So in one of our, Dr. Abraham was once telling that I asked a resident in Stanford that, do you have a knee hammer? Nobody had the knee hammer. But every case file was written knee jack plus.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, it's not what people talk about. To be honest, how do we practice medicine? And what are we trying to see? We are trying to find out that is there a pathology which needs an active treatment? And if there is an active treatment, is lifestyle enough, or should we go for drugs? Everything, whether we are talking about lipid levels, whether we're talking about diabetes, whether we're talking about blood pressure, everything is same, right? Because when a person is stressed out, when he is abnormal, everything might go up. So we are trying to assess in that point of time in the clinic. How is he? Okay, is his physiology abnormal? Many patients who would have significant blood pressure, all of us would have told him, you go back and come back, don't do anything after 3 days, because our clinical feeling was that this blood pressure is just a response of his by good.
Yeah.
So I think
Okay.
it is.
Yeah, I think that's a practical advice. Now, coming to Parikh, you wanted to ask, say something. Please go ahead, Parikh.
No. What I mean, taking right measurement of blood pressure at home is quite possible. I mean, at home there is no problem, because keeping blood pressure on dining table, sitting on dining chair, I mean, you can take very rightly blood pressure. So you explain or educate the patient. It is not a difficult thing. In my hospital, what I do, I have kept blood pressure, automated blood pressure instrument outside, outside the office, and every patient of any problem, his blood pressure is being taken. And now I am seeing so many persons of blood pressure who do not know that they are suffering from blood pressure. So
Okay.
mass screening of blood pressure is also very, very important, because they do not know that they are suffering from hypertension. हम क्यों blood pressure ले सर, हमें कुछ हुआ ही नहीं, because they are asymptomatic. They do not know. Either they will come with hemiplegia, stroke, or with ischemic heart disease or something else. So I think in every hospital, every patient who comes to your hospital, his blood pressure should be taken out of office. Just asking somebody, just engage one person, and then he can take blood pressure of all the patients who are entering in the hospital.
That is why we are now promoting mass screening wherever it's possible. I want everybody to have the blood pressure apparatus in the bus station, railway station, airport, mall, library, barber shop, etc. So that at least once they will have an opportunity to measure the blood pressure. Before I go to the panelists, there are some questions in the chat box which I think we will satisfy them. Then I will come to Mangesh and then Parikh. What are contraindications of statins? Oh God, I don't know why they are asking. How to treat patients with dyslipidemia who are not tolerating even small dose of statins? Dr. G.S. Sinha. And Tiny, because you are a versatile person, they are asking statin and dyslipidemia. Would you like to answer the question?
We can keep all those for a statin session. Why corrupt and basic?
Yeah, yes. And then there's another Mukherjee is asking advantage of bisoprolol over metoprolol. Anjan Mukherjee.
Yeah, see, basically they are all selective beta blockers. We have selective beta blockers which are beta 1 selective, but metoprolol is beta 1 selective. Beta 1 is to beta 2 about 75:1. Bisoprolol is about 119:1. Nebivolol is about 291:1. So they are all beta 1 selective. More selective means it will have effect only on the beta 1 receptor, not on beta 2. So more beta 1 means you will have less of bronchospasm, you will have less of erectile dysfunction, you will have less of non-cardiac side effect. That's it. But basically all three selective beta blockers are good. You have metoprolol, you have bisoprolol, you have nebivolol. Carvedilol is not selective, and there is also an additional alpha blocking.
Yes.
And Sunny Jaiswal asking, what is your opinion on bisoprolol role in heart failure, economic as compared to ARNI?
No, see, today it is very clear that you need to give your patient a beta blocker, a RAS inhibitor. RAS inhibitor can be ACE inhibitor, ARB, or an ARNI, which now has translated to ARNI totally, an SGLT inhibitor, and an MRA. These four has to go in any heart failure, right? Because they improve survival. So it is not a question of how your patient feels. The patient comes and says, Dr. Saab, I am fine after my heart attack. His ejection fraction is 40. But you should try and see that can he get all these four, because it improves his survival, his long-term benefit. So beta blocker, bisoprolol is different. ARNI is different. Simply because you are giving beta blocker doesn't mean you will not give ARNI. But suppose you say, I'm asking you a question, a patient will take only one. We would always give only beta blocker, because beta blocker is one which improves survival. Not only that, it prevents sudden cardiac death. There's no other medication that prevents sudden cardiac death as good as a beta blocker. in heart failure.
And Atanu Basumati, respected teachers,
Sir,
in our scenario.
Sir, can I add on what Nair
Okay,
sir
okay,
was talking
okay,
about?
okay, okay. Please,
As,
Mangesh.
choice. And the
Mangesh.
recent guidelines with conjunction with what Dr. Nair sir has said, is this that nowadays, probably, you need to judge the patient symptomatically. Just the choice of the anti-failure drugs needs to be depending on how patients present to you. If the patient is grossly in the fluid overload, probably the diuretics will become the first choice along with the rest of the medications. Where one thing you need to be very sure that gone are good old days where people used to practice the step ladder pattern of the treatment, where one drug, then probably wait for the effect, and then the second drug and third. Now probably you need to complete the entire profile of heart failure management as quickly as possible with the best tolerated dosages, because as Nair sir has rightly pointed out, that it's not just the management of heart failure now. It's just like an insurance policy. You invest now, probably you are gaining in the long-term benefits. So that is what has really changed. So then aggression is mandatory in managing the patients of heart failure. Not only that, you should be also equally sensitizing yourself as far as picking them early and intervening them early to get the maximum possible benefits. If somebody has had a full-blown heart failure with a reduced ejection fraction, well, you have already missed the boat. You are chasing the lost boat. You need to pick them up at the right time. So be suspicious, watch them, call them for, and that is where probably your clinical examination, a good history taking will always come into the picture. That is what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Mangesh. Thank you. One more, respected teachers, our scenario in the peripheral areas where patients don't follow up regularly and are not educated enough, should we go for CCB plus ARB or any other combination? Atanu Basumati. Tiny, you can give a simple answer.
Good enough. So if your patient's blood pressure is controlled with the CCB and ARB, there's nothing like it. It's one of the frontline combinations promoted by ESC.
Okay.
One of the most accepted combinations.
Yeah. Sandeep Desai is saying HBBM, ABBM should be used not only for diagnosis but also for monitoring. We all should use it more. Thank you, Sandeep, for your comment. Can I start using ARNI straight away on my patient with resistant hypertension tomorrow? Is it an approved indication? Jayaraja.
Yes, provided your the diagnosis of resistant hypertension should be that patient should be on 3 drugs, which means a calcium antagonist, a diuretic, and a RAS inhibitor on full dosage. And then you have added, obviously, the next drug should be an aldosterone antagonist, spironolactone. So we have added all these 4, and your patient's heart rate is rapid, you have added a beta blocker. So understand that you have all these 5 drugs on board, and still you have got hypertension, right? So, and you ruled out everything secondary. You ruled out a renal artery stenosis, you ruled out a CKD, you ruled out pheochromocytoma, you ruled out OSA, you ruled out everything. Now, what do? You have choice of adding a central drug. What we do is like clonidine or moxonidine or alpha-methyl dopa, which is not available. Or you have the option of adding these new drugs like ARNI or SGLT inhibitors. Means you change over your RAS inhibitor to ARNI. So it is up to you, provided you've already given those 5 drugs of beta blockade, ACE inhibitor, CCB, diuretic, and aldosterone antagonist.
Be watchful.
Very good question.
And be watchful for the renal functions of these patients. If at all you need to use.
I think one more question in the chat box, then I'll come to you. Thanks for enlightening us about the future antihypertensives. I have never used ARNI as antihypertensive drug, but I've observed in patients with heart failure with systolic blood pressure around 90, when given ARNI, the systolic blood pressure rises marginally due to improvement in heart failure.
Yes, that is the exact way what ARNI are supposed to do. You know, when you are treated heart failure adequately, and when that, in fact, that is one of the signs where the patients, those who come with a decompensated heart failure, where they have got a low blood pressure on presentation, they may be 60, systolic 90 or lower than 90, you probably, start ARNI little lower dosage, and you will find that in spite of having valsartan being an ARB there, still it causes the rise because it improves the systolic function of the heart. So that's how the whole concept of ARNI is.
Yeah, and Tiny, what about the newer drug which is going to come in the market, Pribostat? Pribostat, that's the ARNI, sorry, that is ACE inhibitor type 3. The brain aminopeptide inhibitor.
Yes. The initial report that came in the ESC, last ESC, was not really very beneficial. It did not have an endpoint benefit. It lowered blood pressure as good as an ACE inhibitor, but there was no benefit in reduction of endpoints.
And in a situation where you said the thickening of the artery will be reduced, a situation where the patient has got a BP of 170 by 70, if you reduce the blood pressure systolic, diastolic also will it get reduced by
No,
treating?
generally not. You can safely reduce the systolic BP. The diastolic will not drop.
Okay, so especially when you say that the newer drug, whatever you said, which will reduce the thickening and the these drugs will reduce only that, then augmented index will be reduced. So diastolic pressure will go up. In fact, if you treat systolic blood pressure. And what is the best drug when somebody has got fever or hyperthermia, the antihypertensive? Somebody's got high blood pressure, I mean high fever and hyperthermia, like picture.
Treat the hyperthermia and fever, his BP may go away.
Yeah, that way we need to first treat fever and get
Yeah,
his
but no, but
fever down.
Somebody's on antihypertensive and they got high fever. Do you reduce the dose of antihypertensive, or what is the best drug and what do you do?
There are clear 6 days regimens for as we have got 6 days regimen for diabetic patients. There are also 6 days regimens for hypertensive patients also. In
Yes.
fact, I can say that you need to judge and assess why this patient has a fever and does he have an associated dehydrating condition or not. And then you need to judge, depending on his urine output, his amount of the fever, and the place where he's staying, what season he's getting fever, everything, all factors will be taken into the consideration. And you don't have to overzealously reduce. At the same time, you don't have to change otherwise, unless and until it is indicated.
I think we are coming to the close, but before I go to the panelists, Tiny Nair, one final question. Somebody comes to you, a 40-year-old man with first time coming to you with checking the blood pressure. How do you approach step by step, very, very easily understandable way for the practical points? Somebody comes with 140, somebody 40-year-old comes, they have, let us say 150, 94. How do you approach?
The first thing we have to make sure that, see, a 40-year-old man with no known risk factors, no comorbidities, no target organ damage, we need not be overzealous and immediately start on medication. First of all, try to confirm that does he really have hypertension, right? Your BP apparatus may be wrong, your nurse would have taken wrongly, your junior doctor would have recorded wrongly and labeled him as hypertension. Try to see, does he have any target organ damage or anything signifying that he has hypertension. If he doesn't have, you can easily wait, tell him that let him restrict salt, let him do some exercise, not smoke, not take alcohol, not too much of coffee, and come back and see. Because run blood pressure 140/50 over 94 for 1 week, 2 weeks, 10 days, what is going to happen? Nothing, right? As long as he is healthy. So don't overzealously start on a medication. Today's physicians always have a tendency that write something, tell me start on 40 immediately or amlodipine, then he will get pediledema. Stop the amlodipine and put some benadipine. What is the point? He may not even have hypertension, right? So if you want to establish hypertension, on the other hand, you know somebody who is a diabetic has come with a diastolic blood pressure 160 over 100, and you clearly know his hypertension. You have an S4 there and you have an LVH there, you are going to treat immediately with drugs. So it all depends on what kind of blood pressure he has and what kind of patient population you are seeing, and then tailor his treatment. There's no simple way like algorithm telling that, okay, 40-year man, do this, and do this. It all depends. I might actually send him home without doing anything, just consoling him and asking him to come back after a week, after controlling good lifestyle, and recheck whether he actually has hypertension or not.
And what about combination therapy in the first step itself? Now international guidelines says even the first step you give combination. You are
clearly said a little while ago that yes, we always start on combination therapy, excepting unless the patient has very borderline blood pressure, patient is very frail, or patient has some other problems. Normally, a small dose of combination therapy, either a RAS inhibitor with a CCV small dose or a RAS inhibitor with a diuretic, depending on whether your patient has volume overload or whether your patient has got a non-volume overloaded situation. Today we say that unlike the previous step ladder, the whole responsibility is on you. You decide as a physician what your patient needs. Is your patient more of volume overloaded? Is he peripheral vasoconstricted? Is he sympathetic driven? You can clinically easily make it out. And that is how you make an intelligent choice of what combination. But it is always preferred that the first should be a combination therapy of 2 drugs. Yes.
Okay. What about iatrogenic masked hypertension? What is iatrogenic masked hypertension?
See, iatrogenic masked hypertension is simply you treat your patient with a very short-acting drug, right? So patient comes, suppose you give a very short-acting medicine. He continues to take it for a week and comes back. Just before seeing you, he takes it. Comes to your clinic and you see, oh, BP is normal 120/80. Okay, but he goes home and 3 hours later it becomes 160, 100. So you give a very short acting medicine to a person, create a situation that couple of hours the BP is controlled. So the rest of it is masked. So actually he's exposed to hypertension created by us. The iatrogenic mass hypertension seems to be far worse than usual mass hypertension because nature doesn't want fluctuation, right? Whether it's a glucose fluctuation or BP fluctuation, this is variability that creates trouble. So we should be careful in not using short acting drugs and using a proper combination to have a 24/7 control of BP.
Thank you, Nair. Dr. Parikh, now your final message for all our audience as a experienced physician, your final message, take home message from your side.
The final message is that one should ask for home BP monitoring. That is the most important thing. They should purchase blood pressure instrument, because if they are having blood pressure, then they can take their blood pressure, their family members' blood pressure, and then their guests who are coming to them, they all will also ask for blood pressure. So it is very important that one blood pressure instrument, home BP monitoring, takes the BP of so many persons and those who do not know that they are suffering from hypertension. Number one. Number two, as Dr. Tini Nair said, very important, if blood pressure is 140 or 150/90, we must see that the blood pressure has been rightly taken, again and again, ask him to come again. Then we must ask them for lifestyle modification for 3 to 6 months. And then if blood pressure still remains above 140/90, then we should add one drug. And accordingly, as Dr. Tini said, we must increase the doses and start combination drugs. So I think the most important thing is that we must take blood pressure rightly, still I say, and home BP is much better than office BP.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parikh. Now, my brother Mangesh, your final take-home message for all of us.
Yeah, so thank you very much, sir, for this beautiful opportunity. I once again compliment Nair, sir, for such an amazing talk.
You will only compliment Nair only, not me, Mangesh. I'm very sorry.
You are already champion. See, the king can be only, that say, you have already established yourself as that,
champion of the
boss, the champion of the hypertension. You have won that title, sir. So
okay, please, Mangesh. Yeah.
So there are a couple of things I wanted to, come out. Is this that as we manage hypertension, we need to also sensitize ourselves that there is a large population which are pre-hypertensives waiting to become hypertensives. 33% patients, probably 1 in every 3. So let us take it as 33 or let us say 40% people are hypertensives. But there are nearly 50% of the people, young people, those are waiting to become hypertensives. So you need to understand the need of aggressive lifestyle change in the pre-hypertensive patients. Do not take the blood pressure of 140 or 90 as one-time finding and just stay quiet. And at least this is an opportunity for you to at least insist on the lifestyle change. And that's what I probably would like to give 10 S commandments of hypertension in control in India. Right? The first S comes as salt restriction, very important. Change of sedentary lifestyle needs to be changed to active lifestyle. So understand importance of sleep, as Dr. Muruganathan keeps on insisting again and again. And with it will come the stress management, which is extremely important. Most of the people with hypertension will also have a concomitant diabetes. So along with salt, sugar will be a pivotal thing. And that is where probably, as Dr. Nair says, SGLTs are going to play the big role. Probably insist on the young hypertensives, as even Dr. Nair has talked in his talk, that a good blood pressure control will also improve on the sexual activity. So, insist the importance of blood pressure control, especially in the young sexually active individuals. Reduced down the saturated fats consumption. So that was another S that I wanted to give. Expose yourself to good sunlight, because sunlight along with vitamin D has got a beautiful RAS inhibition effect. Last two would be that the awareness should increase right from the school days, as we teach students the importance of controlling blood pressure, changing of lifestyle, they're important. And the last one is, along with the social awareness, smoking cessation or a tobacco cessation in any form would be my take home message for most of the people who are watching us.
Thank you for the 10S from a sweet person like you. Thank you, Mangesh. Now I'll come to Tiny Nair. Your final message, Tiny.
Oh, nothing really. I think, hypertension is so common. And only thing is we are always bothered about what is new and all that. Remember that we should not be the first person to write a new medication and not a last person to write an old medication. That's my take home.
Yeah. My message to all of you, I had been bargaining, shouting, requesting so many years that we want more hypertension specialists, we want more hypertension clinics, we want to promote home blood pressure monitoring. You can see so many people are starting diabetic clinic all over. And I was requesting Mangesh in Bombay, and Mangesh and myself were motivating 3 or 4 people in Bombay to start hypertension clinic and hypertension center of excellence. I think we love to promote hypertension clinic, and we must focus on hypertension so that the world and the country will have less hypertension problems, because hypertension is much more serious than diabetes. But fortunately, we have more diabetologists but no hypertensiologists. So my message is this: please focus on hypertension and develop hypertension. I thank the Ajanta for
before you go
yeah,
to
yeah,
Thanksgiving, sir.
yeah.
Before you go to Thanksgiving,
yes.
let us compliment Dr. Muruganathan, sir, for one of the best moderations that he did. And as usual, amazing guy with such an immense presence of mind.
Presentation.
And not only the amazing presence of mind, but his sense of humor and the timing of his humor is outstanding. And let us compliment his efforts of, and he actually earned that title of being the champion of the hypertension management. It was in his tenure as being a secretary, working under his leadership from API and Dr. Parikh, that we actually, ignited the torch of hypertension awareness. And as he rightly has pointed out, that this hypertension management is simplest one, and with the biggest impact as far as the cardiovascular outcomes are concerned. If you ask me, three interventions: blood pressure control, lipid lowering or LDL cholesterol reduction, and HbA1c control, which one will have a impact on the target outcome, cardiovascular target outcome, better impact? And it will be always just a simple reduction of blood pressure systolic by 4 millimeters will have an amazing impact. Now that is what blood pressure management is. And what you have to do is just pop in a pill and follow few instructions. You do not require too many of investigations to be done as you require that in diabetes or in other challenges. So simple management, if it is adequately done, maybe possibly that, and that is what he want to try and, spread the message that we need many hypertensionologists in this country. With this, I would hand it over to Muruganathan, sir.
Thank you.
Huge compliment and a big clap to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mangesh. Because this point, all of you must spread, because it's very simple to treat, but many medicines are there. But the paradox is the triple paradox. We don't have a good control. We don't measure properly, though it is simple. And we have so many drugs, but we don't. The control rate in India is 12 to 13%. So I think by 2022, with all your effort, the control rate will become better. And Tiny Nair was giving so many new things. Even the BNP, if all of us start using, the rate will come down. Because any drug, when it is come to the market, it is very high. But after many people use, the drug rate comes down. So if everybody starts using PNB, all the lab will reduce, and they may find something to reduce the drug thing. And I want to request to Ajanta, please give some home BP monitors to the API, and we will give it to so many people, because I had the pleasure of giving at least 10,000 monitors all over the country. So if Ajanta gives at least 100 to 200 BP monitors to Mangesh Tivaskar in the API, we will give it to so many poor people and then educate them. So I think, Mangesh, you can follow with Kanu. He will give you a good compliment of BP monitors, which we can give it to poor people. Now, I thank once again the API for giving this opportunity, and Ajanta also, and Tiny Nair for the excellent talk. And of course, my brother KK Parikh and my lovable Mangesh Tivaskar. Thanks. And over to the Dr. Kamal Kumar for his final.
Kamal, if you have recorded this session, please share the links to us. Yeah. Because we would like to hear it again and again, because there's so many.
We'll put it in the API website also. We'll put it in the API website.
Yes, and we'll also try and put it in the API website for the benefit of so many people.
Thank you, Dr. Muruganathan. I just take this opportunity to convey heartfelt thanks to all our esteemed panelists, Dr. Muruganathan, Dr. Tiny Nair, wonderful session. Dr. Parikh Saab and Dr. Mangeshkar. It was a wonderful session. I think a lot of new perspective has been highlighted by Dr. Tiny Nair about the currently using the drug like ARNI, ZPTA, as well as the beta blocker in the newer perspective. I hope these are the very important treatment approach. So thanks, doctor, once again for this very insightful program. On behalf of Ajanta, once again, heartfelt thanks to all the panelists as well as the audience also for sparing their time. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And my request about the BP monitors, home BP monitors, Kanu.
Yes, sir. I'll keep it in mind.
Yes, please keep in mind and give it to
Sure.
our API